My name's Tom Parker, and I work as a delivery driver for Horizon Express. A few months back, I had a really strange experience that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. The route I was driving took me through the suburbs of this small town called Pine Hollow, a place where every street seems to blend into the next. Rows of identical houses, each one as quiet and unassuming as the last. On that particular day, I was doing my usual rounds. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the sky starts to turn that hazy orange, casting long shadows over everything. I had a delivery for a house halfway down Maple Lane, a pretty average neighborhood on the surface. The house itself was 2 stories tall, with a massive oak tree dominating the front yard, as I pulled up to the curb and started walking up the narrow pathway to the front door. I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like I was being watched. When I looked up at the house, I saw him. A man standing in the upstairs window, just staring at me. Not blinking, not moving, just staring. His eyes locked on mine, and for a second, it felt like the world had gone silent. He was tall, thin, and his face had this hollow, almost gaunt look to it. The way he stared at me, it was like he could see right through me. I tried to ignore it, dropped the package on the front step, and headed back to my truck. But I couldn't resist one last glance over my shoulder. He was still there, in the same spot, his eyes following me all the way back to my truck. A few days later, I had another delivery to that same house. This time, as I approached, I could already feel my skin crawl. Sure enough, there he was again, in the exact same spot, with that same unsettling stare. It was like he hadn't moved since the last time I saw him. The next week, I got another delivery for that address, and I was already bracing myself for his creepy gaze. But this time, when I looked up, the window was empty. For a split second, I felt relieved, until I noticed a piece of paper taped to the front door. It read, "Please deliver package to the back door today. Gate is open," with a hand-drawn arrow pointing to the side of the house. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me that something was off. But I reasoned with myself. Maybe he was just worried about porch pirates, or maybe the package was valuable. So, I walked around to the side of the house, where a tall wooden fence surrounded the backyard. The gate was open, just like the note said. So, I stepped through. As I made my way to the back door, I noticed how eerily quiet it was back there. No sounds of birds or distant traffic, just silence. I set the package down and turned to leave. But when I got back to the gate, it was shut. Not just closed, locked. My heart started pounding in my chest. I pushed and pulled at the latch, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like I was trapped. Just then, I looked back toward the house, and there he was, standing at the back door, watching me. His eyes didn't have that same intensity as before. Now, they seemed almost amused. I forced a nervous smile and said, "The gate's stuck. I can't get it open." He didn't say a word. He just pointed to the back door, which was wide open, gesturing for me to come inside. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, but I didn't see any other way out. So I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt like I had entered another world. The house was pitch black, every window covered with thick curtains, and the only light came from a dim bulb flickering somewhere down the hall. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I kept walking straight ahead, my eyes fixed on the front door, praying it wouldn't be locked. The man was right behind me, his footsteps slow and deliberate, matching my every move. When I reached the front door, I grabbed the handle and twisted it. To my relief, it opened, and I bolted out, almost tripping over the front step in my haste to get back to my truck. I looked back one last time before getting in, and there he was, standing in the doorway. His face twisted into the most unsettling smile I'd ever seen. It wasn't a smile of kindness or gratitude. It was a smile that said he knew something I didn't. that he had me exactly where he wanted me, even if just for a moment. When I got back to the depot that day, I went straight to my supervisor and begged to switch routes. I told him everything about that man and his creepy behavior. Luckily, I managed to swap with a coworker who took over that part of my route. A few weeks later, I ran into that coworker during a shift change. I asked him if he'd noticed anything weird about the guy at that house, if he'd ever seen him staring from the window. My coworker just shrugged and said he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt a chill run down my spine. Why did that guy act like that only when I was there? Was it something about me? Looking back now, I still can't shake the feeling that he was playing some twisted game, and that I was the only one who knew I was part of it. My name's Jake Saunders, and I work as a delivery driver for a little place called Dragon's Noodle House. Best gig I could get for some quick cash at my age, mostly because of the tips. My buddy Tyler works there too. He's usually the one at the counter, answering calls and handling orders. We're the only two guys there who aren't Asian, but that's never been a big deal. I actually prefer being on the road anyway, less talking, more driving. One night during our usual late shift, Tyler finished up on a call and shot me a look. He said, "Jake, you've got a delivery, man. It's kinda out there, though." I shrugged it off. I delivered to plenty of weird places before. A few minutes later, they handed me this brown paper bag, and I was on my way. The address led me to this dirt driveway, barely visible from the main road. It felt like I'd driven right into the middle of nowhere. The property was overgrown, wild, like no one had touched it in years. The house itself was an old, crumbling wreck. Not a single light on inside, and the grass so high it practically swallowed my feet when I got out of the car. I called Tyler, told him this place seemed abandoned, but he passed the phone to our boss. Our boss, he's kind of a stubborn guy, barked at me in his thick accent. So, I did what he said. I climbed the 3 creaky steps to the front door and knocked. There wasn't even a doorbell or a handle, just a dull, hollow sound echoing into the darkness. I waited for about 30 seconds, nothing. Not a single sound from inside. Frustrated, I started heading back to my car, figuring I'd just leave. But then, I saw it. One of the upstairs windows suddenly flicked on, a dim yellow light glowing through the dirty glass. My skin started to crawl. Something about that light felt wrong. But I thought, okay, maybe someone's finally answering. So, I went back to the door, ready to knock again. Before my knuckles even touched the wood, the door creaked open, just a crack. No one was standing there, just darkness beyond the doorframe. I pushed it open a little more and called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed, bouncing off the empty walls inside. And then I heard it. A voice, faint, almost a whisper. My heartbeat started to pound in my ears. There was a staircase in the middle of the hall, leading up into the darkness. And then I saw it. At the top of the stairs, just barely visible in the dim light, an arm reached out from around the corner. It was doing this slow, stiff come here motion, like it was beckoning me closer. I froze. Every instinct in my body told me not to go up those stairs, trying to keep my voice steady. I called out, "I have your food," as I took one hesitant step forward. But as I moved, that arm disappeared back into the shadows. It was like it melted into the darkness of that room. I stood there for a moment, feeling my legs tremble, and said as firmly as I could, "Look, I'm not coming in there. You want the food? You come down here with the money, or I'm leaving." Silence. And then, without warning, the arm whipped out of the room. But this time, it was different. Something flew at me from the darkness. It happened so fast. I didn't even have time to react. The thing hit me square in the chest and fell to the floor with a sickening thud. I looked down, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a severed arm, A real, human arm, stiff, cold, and definitely. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet as I bolted down the stairs. The bag of food still clutched in my hand. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slammed the door shut, and sped away from that house as fast as I could. I drove straight to the nearest house with a light on, banged on the door like a madman. And when the woman answered, I blurted out what just happened. Her face went pale, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. No one's lived in that house for over a year. She promised to call the police, and after a tense few minutes of her dialing and explaining, I headed back to the restaurant, my hands still shaking. When I got there, I told my boss everything. He didn't believe me at first, thought I was messing around, but I could see it in his eyes. He was scared too, even if he wouldn't admit it. He let it go though, like it was just another weird night. Last year, I was at home one night. I live alone in this old house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It was one of those late evenings in November, the kind when the cold creeps in through the walls. I was sitting in my living room around 11:30 p.m., just zoning out in front of the TV. The room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the murmur of the late-night news. I remember glancing out the window for no particular reason, and that's when I saw it. A UPS truck. It was parked halfway between my front yard and my neighbor's, just sitting there on the street, idle. Now that struck me as odd. I mean, at that hour, a delivery truck, in this neighborhood. It's not common to see cars parked on the road. Everyone has driveways. I kept watching the TV, trying not to overthink it, but as midnight rolled around, my eyelids were getting heavy. I stood up, turned off the living room light, and caught another glimpse of the truck, still there, just sitting. Something about that made my skin prickle. It was way too late for any delivery. Trying to shake the unease, I went through my bedtime routine, brushing my teeth, turning off lights, the usual. But I couldn't let it go, and before heading to bed, I took another look. The truck hadn't moved an inch, and then I saw him. A man stepped out of the truck, wearing a full UPS uniform, brown pants, brown jacket, the works. But what really got me were the sunglasses. Who wears sunglasses at night? He was holding a medium-sized cardboard box, just like he was making a regular delivery. Only, it was well past midnight. He started walking down the street, slow and deliberate. My stomach dropped when I saw him veer off and head straight up my driveway. I hadn't ordered anything, hadn't even expected a package. So why was he coming to my house? He walked right up to my front door, his eyes hidden behind those ridiculous sunglasses, like he was trying to avoid being recognized. He looked around for a second, then set the box down on my doorstep. That's when things got real weird. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something. It looked like a crowbar. That's when panic set in. I ran to the front door, flipped on the outside light, and watched as the bulb threw its harsh glare onto the driveway. The man froze for a split second. Then, without any sign of panic, he slipped the crowbar back into his jacket, turned on his heel, and walked calmly back to his truck, like nothing had happened. No rush, no hesitation. Just got in, started it up, and drove off. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, as I called the police. 10 minutes later, 2 officers showed up, checked out the box on my porch. It was completely empty, just an ordinary cardboard box. Nothing inside, like it was some kind of prop, a decoy. I told them everything I could, every detail, every eerie glance, the way he walked. They said they'd keep an eye out for any UPS trucks in the area during late hours. And that was that. A week went by, and then I heard the news. They'd caught a man linked to a string of robberies in the area. Turned out, it was the same guy who'd been at my house that night. He wasn't even a UPS driver, not anymore. He used to work for them years ago, but hadn't been with the company in a long time. He'd been using his old uniform to blend in, to look official, while he scoped out houses to rob. Mine was next on his list. No doubt about it. He'd been sitting in that truck, waiting for the lights in my house to go out, thinking I'd gone to bed. When I turned that porch light on, it must have thrown him off his game. I don't like to think about what could have happened if I hadn't turned that light on when I did. I'm just grateful I acted when I did. And now, every night before bed, I double-check that the lights are on and the doors are locked tight. My name's Alex Grant, and a couple of years back, I used to work at this Domino's in Fairfield, Connecticut. It was one of those places that closed late, 3 a.m. on weekends. I was taking a gap year from college back then, and my boss knew it. So he always threw me on the 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. shifts. You know, the graveyard ones that no one else wanted. Most nights, there'd be at least 3 of us working those late hours. One cooking the pizzas, one taking orders, and one doing the deliveries. This particular Saturday night, Jeff was on pizza duty. Jeff was this grumpy 28-year-old Italian guy who always seemed like he hated the world. When he told you to do something, you did it. No questions asked. Around 2:45 a.m., Jeff handed me an order for 2 pizzas and told me to take them to an address I still remember, 27 Crofton Lane. I grabbed my keys, muttered a quick "got it," and headed out to my old beat-up 2004 Honda Civic. Fairfield was mostly quiet that time of night, and the roads were empty. Just this eerie silence hanging in the air. As I drove, I left the main road and turned onto these smaller back streets. No streetlights, just darkness stretching on for miles. The only light coming from my car's dim headlights. The road turned into this narrow dirt path, surrounded by thick woods. And then, out of nowhere, I heard a loud bang, a sharp thud that shook the whole car. I felt the handling go off and there was this awful flopping sound. I knew right away, I'd gotten a flat tire. I stopped the car and got out, hoping it wasn't as bad as it sounded. But sure enough, the front right tire was completely flat. I could see, through the faint glow of the headlights, that the house I was supposed to deliver to was just a short walk away. So I figured I'd drop off the pizzas first, maybe even ask for some help while I was there. I made my way to the house, a small, average-looking place, surrounded by nothing but trees. All the lights were on inside, but the blinds were shut tight, like they were hiding something. I rang the doorbell, and almost immediately, this guy opened the door, a normal-looking dude, maybe in his late 30s. I handed him the pizzas and mentioned the flat tire, hoping he might have a jack or something I could use. He nodded, looking all concerned, and said, "Yeah, let's check it out." He followed me back to my car, his footsteps crunching in the dirt. We both stared at the tire for a moment before he said, "I can help you with that. Just let me grab my tools from inside." As he walked back to his house, I started thinking, what could I have hit on this dirt road? That's when I saw it, a small spike strip, half buried in the ground, just sitting there like it was waiting for me. My heart started racing. This wasn't an accident. That guy, he put it there. I decided to play dumb, pretending I hadn't seen the spike strip. When he came back outside, I acted calm, told him I didn't find anything unusual. He gave me a strange look, like he was sizing me up, then turned back toward his house, muttering something about grabbing more tools. The second his back was turned, I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into reverse. I wasn't sticking around to find out what this guy was planning to do. The tire wobbled and thumped against the dirt road, but I kept going, making sure to avoid that spike strip this time. Just as I pulled back onto the main road, I glanced in my rearview mirror and my blood ran cold. There he was, running after my car. His face twisted into this maniacal grin. I didn't have a choice. I floored it, even though I could feel the wheel shredding to pieces under me. I managed to lose him in the dark, twisting roads, but I didn't stop until I saw the familiar lights of the town in the distance. I drove straight back to Domino's, the whole way feeling like he was right on my tail. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, the clock showed it was almost 3:30 a.m. I rushed inside, breathless, and told Jeff and Sarah, the other girl working that night, What happened? Jeff was his usual annoyed self, but when I described the guy in the spike strip, even he seemed rattled. Sarah's eyes were wide as she listened, like she couldn't believe it. I mean, neither could I. We locked up the place, and they told me to drive home slow, to be careful. I thought the worst was over, but as I started my slow drive back, I noticed something. There was a car following me. No headlights on, just creeping along behind me. I pulled over in front of some random house, hoping they'd pass, but they didn't. They stopped too, just a little further up the road. Panic set in. I called the cops right there, gave them my exact location, told them I thought someone was following me. About 5 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. I flagged them down, pointed out the car still sitting there, and just then, that car took off. Tires screeching, disappearing into the night. The officer sped after them, lights flashing, and I was left there, staring into the darkness, wondering who that man was and what he really wanted. I never found out if the police caught up to him. Somehow, I doubt they did. But after that night, I never looked at deliveries the same way again. And 2 months later, I quit that job for good.